The clinking of crystal wine glasses and the sharp scent of expensive truffle oil usually meant one thing: another grueling Friday night shift. But for Madeline, tonight was about to become a waking nightmare. 8 months ago, she was the untouchable wife of Chicago's most feared syndicate boss. Tonight, she is just a nameless waitress, hiding in plain sight with a 7-month baby bump she's desperate to protect, when her ruthless ex-husband walks into a restaurant, hand in hand with his glamorous new fiancée. The collision of her past and present is inevitable. She thought she had escaped the Mafia. She was wrong. The kitchen of the Gilded Vine was a chaotic symphony of shouting chefs, clattering pans, and the relentless hiss of searing meat. Madeline Hayes pushed a loose strand of damp, dark hair out of her eyes and leaned against the cold, stainless steel prep counter. At 29 weeks pregnant, the swelling in her ankles felt like a permanent fixture, and the dull ache in her lower back was a constant reminder of the life growing inside her. "Order up, Maddie. Table 4 needs the branzino, and Table 7 is asking for the sommelier again," barked Thomas, the restaurant's perpetually stressed floor manager. "I'm on it, Thomas," Madeline replied, her voice soft but steady. She hoisted the heavy tray onto her shoulder, expertly balancing the silver cloches. 2 years ago, Madeline didn't carry trays. She wore couture gowns and attended galas at the Armory. She had been Madeline Castellano, the fiercely guarded wife of Vincent Castellano, the undisputed head of the Chicago outfit. Vincent was a man of terrifying power and cold calculation, yet behind closed doors he had loved her with a possessive, all-consuming fire. But fire eventually burns everything it touches. 8 months ago, Madeline had uncovered a devastating betrayal within the family. Vincent's own cousin, Matteo, was framing her for siphoning syndicate funds to a rival family. Before she could prove her innocence, a hit was ordered on her life. She didn't wait to see if Vincent would believe her, or the fabricated evidence. She ran. She left her wedding ring on the mahogany dresser, changed her name, and vanished into the sprawling suburbs of Illinois. She didn't know she was pregnant until 3 weeks later. Madeline pushed through the swinging double doors into the dimly lit dining room. The Gilded Vine was an exclusive, reservations-only establishment. The lighting was low, casting shadows over the plush velvet booths and mahogany tables. It was the perfect place to hide. The clientele were too absorbed in their own wealth to notice a pregnant waitress with tired eyes. She delivered the branzino to Table 4 and turned towards the hostess stand. That was when she heard it. "I bought the property on the Gold Coast, Olivia. It's entirely yours to redesign. Whatever you want." The voice was a low, gravelly baritone that sent a violent shiver down Madeline's spine. It was a voice she heard in her nightmares, and to her eternal shame, in her most vulnerable dreams. She froze behind a large potted ficus, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. Slowly she peered through the leaves. Sitting at the center VIP booth, bathed in the soft glow of a crystal chandelier, was Vincent Castellano. He looked exactly the same, yet impossibly more intimidating. His dark hair was meticulously styled, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass, and his bespoke charcoal suit screamed quiet, dangerous wealth. Sitting across from him was Olivia Harrington, the heiress to a massive real estate empire. Olivia was radiant, dripping in diamonds and draped in a crimson silk dress. On her left ring finger sat a blinding, emerald-cut diamond. Madeline's breath hitched. A fiancé, Vincent was moving on. The syndicate had likely declared her dead, allowing him to remarry and solidify a lucrative alliance with the Harrington family. A sharp, unexpected pang of jealousy pierced through her chest, swiftly followed by overwhelming panic. "Maddie!" Thomas hissed from behind her, grabbing her elbow. "What are you doing? VIP table needs service. The regular server, Chloe, just dropped a glass in the back and cut her hand. You have to take the Castellano table, now." Madeline's blood ran cold. "Thomas, no, I can't. Please, I'm feeling sick. My stomach. I don't care if your water is breaking, Madeline, Thomas snapped, his face flushed. That is Vincent Castellano. He owns half the real estate this restaurant sits on. Pour their wine, take their order, and do not make eye contact. Go. Before she could protest, Thomas shoved a fresh linen towel and a notepad into her hands. There was no escape. She pulled her apron higher over her pronounced belly, took a shaky breath, and walked toward the lion's den. The distance from the kitchen to the VIP booth felt like a mile. With every step, Madeline prayed to whatever higher power was listening that the dim lighting would obscure her features. She kept her head bowed, staring at the scuffed toes of her non-slip shoes. "It's beautiful, Vincent," Olivia was saying, her voice a melodic, airy purr. "But I think we should host the engagement party at the Hamptons estate. Chicago is so dreary in October." "Whatever makes you happy," Vincent replied. His tone was smooth, but Madeline knew that specific cadence. It was empty. It was the voice he used for business associates, not lovers. Madeline reached the table. Her hands were shaking so violently she had to grip the edge of her notepad to steady them. "Good evening," Madeline whispered, pitching her voice up, hoping it sounded unfamiliar. "Can I start you off with some sparkling water or perhaps a bottle from the reserve list?" "We'll take the 09 Barolo," Olivia said without looking up, busy admiring her reflection in the polish of her butter knife, "and bring some oysters. Bellon, if you have them." "Right away, ma'am," Madeline murmured. She turned on her heel, desperate to retreat, but the sharp scrape of a chair leg against the hardwood floor stopped her dead. "Wait," Vincent said. The single word fell like an anvil in the quiet space between them. Madeline froze. She didn't turn around. She couldn't. "Turn around," Vincent commanded, the smooth business veneer instantly vanishing, replaced by the lethal authority of a mob boss. "Vincent, darling." "What is it?" Olivia asked, finally looking up. Madeline squeezed her eyes shut, took a ragged breath, and slowly pivoted back to face the table. Vincent's dark, piercing eyes locked onto hers. For 3 agonizing seconds, neither of them breathed. Vincent's expression, usually an impenetrable mask of stone, cracked. His pupils dilated, his jaw went slack, and the crystal tumbler of bourbon in his hand slipped, shattering against the mahogany table. Amber liquid spilled everywhere, dripping onto Olivia's designer dress. "Ah, Vincent, what are you doing?" Olivia shrieked, jumping up and dabbing frantically at her skirt. Vincent ignored her. He slowly stood up, his massive frame towering over the table. His chest was heaving. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost, because as far as the world was concerned, he had. "Madeline," he breathed, the name tearing out of his throat like a jagged piece of glass. I'll get a towel for the spill, sir," Madeline stammered, terrified by the raw, unhinged look in his eyes. She took a step back, her protective instinct flaring as she subtly turned her body, trying to angle her pregnant belly away from his line of sight. But Vincent's gaze was already dropping. He took in her faded black uniform, her lack of makeup, and then his eyes locked onto the undeniable, heavy curve of her stomach beneath the white apron. The silence that followed was suffocating. The ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to fade into a vacuum. Vincent's eyes flicked back to her face, a terrifying storm brewing in his irises. Confusion, disbelief, and a blinding, violent rage warred in his expression. "You're alive," Vincent said, his voice dropping to a deadly, quiet register that made the hairs on Madeline's arms stand up. "You're alive, and you're pregnant." Olivia, oblivious to the nuclear bomb that had just detonated at her table, glared at Madeline. "Do you know this waitress, Vincent? She's completely incompetent. Look at my dress." Vincent didn't even blink in Olivia's direction. "Sit down, Olivia." "Excuse me," Olivia bristled. "I said sit down," Vincent roared, slamming his fist onto the table so hard the silverware jumped. Olivia gasped, instantly collapsing back into her chair in shock. Several patrons at nearby tables stopped eating, turning their heads. Thomas, the manager, began fast walking toward them, a look of sheer panic on his face. "Vincent, please," Madeline whispered, her voice cracking. "Don't do this here." 8 months. Vincent stepped around the table, closing the distance between them. Madeline instinctively backed up until her spine hit a wooden pillar. "I tore this city apart, block by block. I buried an empty casket. And you've been here? Pouring wine? Carrying a child?" He reached out, his large, calloused hand hovering just inches from her stomach. "Don't touch me," she hissed, slapping his hand away. Vincent flinched, but his eyes hardened. "Whose is it, Madeline?" "It's none of your business," Madeline lied, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "You have a fiancé now. Go back to your dinner." "Whose is it?" Vincent repeated, taking another step forward, completely trapping her against the pillar. His scent, cedarwood and gunpowder, enveloped her, dragging her back to a time she was desperately trying to forget. "If you tell me it's Matteo's, I will burn this building to the ground with everyone in it." Madeline's eyes flashed with anger. "Matteo? You think I slept with the man who tried to have me killed? The man who faked those bank statements so you would put a bullet in my head?" Vincent's brow furrowed, a flicker of genuine confusion crossing his face. "Matteo didn't fake anything. He found the accounts. He tried to protect you. He lied to you, Vincent, and you believed him over your own wife." Madeline's voice rose, the suppressed grief and terror of the last 8 months finally boiling over. "I ran because I knew your men were coming for me. I ran to survive." Thomas finally reached the table, physically trembling. "Mr. Castellano, I am so sorry. Is this girl bothering you?" "Madeline, go to the back immediately. You're fired." Vincent didn't look at Thomas. Without breaking eye contact with Madeline, he reached inside his suit jacket. In a flash, a silenced Glock 19 was pressed firmly against the underside of Thomas's chin. Olivia screamed, clapping her hands over her mouth. The surrounding tables erupted in gasps, patrons freezing in terror. "Speak to my wife like that again," Vincent said softly to the manager, "and I will paint the walls with your brains. Walk away." Thomas swallowed hard, tears pricking his eyes, and slowly backed away with his hands raised. Madeline took advantage of the distraction. A sharp, searing cramp suddenly ripped across her abdomen, a Braxton Hicks contraction triggered by the massive spike of adrenaline. She gasped, doubling over slightly and grabbing her stomach. Vincent immediately dropped the gun to his side, his face morphing into panic. "Maddie, are you hurt? What's wrong?" "Stay away from me," she cried out. She turned and shoved her way blindly through the swinging doors into the kitchen. "Madeline, stop!" Vincent yelled, his heavy footsteps thundering behind her. She ignored the shouting chefs and the clattering pans. She threw her apron onto a prep table and bolted out the back delivery exit into the cold, biting Chicago night. The alleyway was dark, smelling of stale rain and garbage. She needed to get to her rusted Honda Civic, parked 3 blocks away. She ran as fast as her swollen body would allow, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. She made it out of the alley and onto the wet pavement of the street, but blinding headlights suddenly flooded her vision. A sleek, black SUV screeched to a halt inches from her. The doors flew open, and 3 men in dark suits stepped out. She recognized the man in the front instantly. Luca, Vincent's right-hand enforcer. "Hello, Mrs. Castellano," Luca said, his voice grim. "The boss said you shouldn't be running in your condition." Madeline spun around to run the other way, but Vincent was already standing at the mouth of the alley. He was breathing heavily, his suit jacket discarded, his eyes locked onto her like a predator who had finally cornered his elusive prey. "It's over, Madeline," Vincent said, walking slowly toward her through the misty rain. "You're coming home, and we are going to find out exactly who is lying." The freezing Chicago rain began to fall harder, slicking the cobblestones of the alley and pasting Madeline's dark hair to her cheeks. She stood frozen between the black SUV blocking the street and the towering, relentless figure of Vincent Castellano closing in from behind. "Don't take another step," Madeline warned, her voice shaking violently as she wrapped her arms protectively over her swollen stomach. Vincent didn't stop until he was mere inches from her. Up close, the lethal calmness he had projected inside the restaurant was entirely gone. His chest rose and fell in ragged breaths, and his dark eyes searched her face with a frantic, agonizing desperation. He reached out, his large hands gripping her shoulders not to restrain her, but as if he needed physical proof she wasn't an apparition. "You are freezing," Vincent muttered, his jaw tight. Without another word, he shrugged off his bespoke suit jacket and draped it over her shivering frame. The heavy wool instantly enveloped her in the scent of cedarwood and gunpowder, a scent that had once been her only comfort. "Get in the car, Madeline." "I am not going anywhere with you," she snapped, trying to shrug off the jacket. "Your men tried to kill me 8 months ago, Vincent. Do you really think I'm going to willingly get into a car with Luca?" Luca, standing by the open door of the SUV, lowered his head. "Boss," he said quietly, "we need to move. The police will respond to the panic alarm Thomas pulled inside the restaurant." Vincent's grip on her shoulders tightened slightly. "If I wanted you dead, Madeline, you would have never made it out of this alley. I buried an empty coffin with your name on it because Matteo showed me the blood in our bedroom. He showed me the offshore wire transfers. I mourned you." His voice cracked on the last word, a stunning display of vulnerability from the head of the Chicago outfit. "Now get in the damn car before you catch pneumonia and hurt the child." The mention of her baby snapped Madeline back to reality. Another sharp cramp seized her lower back, forcing a small gasp from her lips. She had no money, no phone, and nowhere to run. Defeated, she let Vincent guide her into the plush leather interior of the SUV. The ride was suffocatingly silent. The tinted windows shielded them from the flashing neon lights of the city. Vincent sat beside her, his presence a heavy gravitational pull. He poured a glass of water from the console and handed it to her. "Drink," he commanded softly. As she reached for it, his gaze dropped once again to the pronounced curve of her belly beneath her wet uniform. "You said it wasn't mine." Madeline stared out the window, refusing to meet his eye. "It's not." "You always were a terrible liar," Vincent murmured, leaning closer. "You disappeared the 2nd week of February. You look about 30 weeks along. The math isn't difficult, Madeline. You are carrying my heir." "He's not an heir," Madeline suddenly exploded, turning to face him, tears hot and angry in her eyes. "I saw it. He is a baby, my baby, and he is never going to touch a gun, or run a syndicate, or constantly look over his shoulder waiting for a bullet from his own family. I won't let you drag him into this life." Vincent's eyes darkened, a storm of possessive fury brewing within them. "He is a Castellano, and you are my wife. There is no reality where you raise my son in a 2-bedroom apartment, waiting tables for minimum wage." The SUV slowed, pulling into the heavily fortified underground parking garage of a towering high-rise in the South Loop, a secure safe house known only to Vincent's inner circle. "What about Olivia?" Madeline asked bitterly as the car parked. "You seem to have moved on just fine. I saw the ring, a 3-carat emerald cut. Very subtle." Vincent paused, his hand on the door handle. A complicated shadow crossed his face. "The Harrington alliance is business. You are my wife." "I left my ring on the dresser," she whispered, "and I kept it in my pocket every day since," Vincent replied. He stepped out into the garage, leaving Madeline breathless and stunned in the back seat. The penthouse was a fortress of glass and steel, overlooking the sprawling, glittering grid of Chicago. As soon as they entered, Vincent immediately ordered his private physician, Dr. Harrison, to be brought to the building. Madeline sat rigidly on the edge of a massive velvet sofa, wearing one of Vincent's dry dress shirts and a pair of soft sweatpants provided by the safe house staff. The reality of her situation was settling in. She had traded the gritty freedom of her waitress life for a golden cage. Vincent stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, a glass of scotch in his hand, watching her. "Tell me about Matteo," Vincent said, his voice stripped of emotion, reverting to the chillingly pragmatic tone of a mob boss. "Tell me exactly what happened the night you left." Madeline took a deep breath, her hands resting protectively on her stomach. "You were in New York, meeting with the Falcone family. I was in your home office, looking for the deed to the charity foundation. I opened the false bottom of the mahogany desk." Vincent's eyes narrowed. "Only Matteo and I have the key to that compartment." "Matteo left it unlocked," Madeline said. "Inside, I found a secondary ledger. It detailed millions of dollars being siphoned from the outfit's primary ports and funneled into a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands, a corporation registered under my maiden name." The glass in Vincent's hand gave a sharp clink as his grip tightened dangerously. "Before I could even process it," Madeline continued, her voice trembling at the memory, "Matteo walked in. He didn't look surprised. He smiled. He told me that you were going to discover the missing money by the end of the week, and that the trail would lead straight to me." "Why didn't you call me?" Vincent demanded, stepping away from the window. "Why run?" "Because he showed me the doctored audio files, Vincent. He had recordings of me negotiating with the Russian syndicate. He had a hitman standing in the doorway behind him. I barely made it out the servants' staircase. I knew if you saw that evidence, you wouldn't hesitate. You've killed men for far less." Vincent stared at her, the horrific realization washing over him. The cousin he had trusted with his life, the man who had stood beside him at their wedding, had orchestrated a masterful coup. Matteo had framed the only weakness Vincent had, his wife, to steal from the family and break Vincent's spirit. Before Vincent could respond, the heavy oak door of the penthouse swung open. Luca stepped in, his face pale and grim. He walked straight to Vincent and whispered something in his ear. Vincent's expression turned to ice. He looked at Madeline, his jaw clenching so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek. "What is it?" Madeline asked, her heart dropping into her stomach. "Matteo," Vincent said, his voice dangerously low. "Someone from the restaurant recognized you. They tipped off the family. Matteo knows you're alive." Madeline gasped, gripping the armrest of the sofa. "And that's not the worst part," Vincent continued, turning fully to face her. "Olivia Harrington's father just called. Olivia told him about the crazy waitress who interrupted our dinner. Richard Harrington is demanding to know why my deceased wife is pouring wine at his favorite restaurant. If he finds out I've been harboring a Castellano heir while negotiating a merger with his daughter, he will view it as a betrayal." The room spun. Madeline realized she hadn't just blown her own cover. She had ignited a powder keg that could start a full-blown Mafia war between the Castellanos and the Harringtons, with Matteo pulling the strings from the shadows. "Vincent," Madeline whispered, terrified. "What are we going to do?" Vincent walked over to the sofa and knelt down in front of her. He gently placed both of his large hands over hers, right where they rested on her pregnant belly. The warmth of his touch sent a jolt straight to her heart. "You are going to rest," Vincent said, his eyes blazing with a terrifying, protective fire, "and I am going to teach my cousin exactly why he should have made sure you were dead." The rhythmic, rapid thump, thump, thump of a fetal heartbeat filled the sterile silence of the penthouse bedroom. Madeline lay back against the pillows, the cool gel from the portable ultrasound machine smeared across her swollen stomach. Beside the bed, Dr. Harrison adjusted the monitor, a look of profound relief washing over his aged face. "The baby's heart rate is elevated, but stable," Dr. Harrison murmured, wiping the gel away with a towel. "You are severely dehydrated and suffering from acute exhaustion, Mrs. Castellano. But the child, he is fighting." "He," Vincent repeated. He was standing in the corner of the room, half swallowed by the shadows. His voice was a raw, textured whisper. He stepped into the light, his dark eyes fixated on the frozen, grainy image on the monitor. "It's a boy." Madeline pulled her shirt down, her protective instincts flaring even as tears pricked her eyes. "Yes, a boy." Vincent walked to the edge of the bed. For a terrifying, beautiful moment, the ruthless head of the Chicago outfit vanished entirely. In his place was just a man, hollowed out by grief, and suddenly, violently resurrected. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet pouch. From it, he retrieved the platinum wedding band encrusted with diamonds, the exact ring Madeleine had left behind 8 months ago. "Put it on," Vincent commanded softly, though it sounded more like a plea. "Vincent, a ring doesn't fix this," Madeleine whispered. "Matteo is out there. He has the syndicate's backing, because they think I'm a traitor, and Richard Harrington is going to demand blood for humiliating Olivia." "Let me worry about Harrington," Vincent said, taking her left hand and sliding the ring back onto her finger. It fit perfectly. As for Matteo, he made one fatal miscalculation. He thought my grief made me blind. It only made me patient. Before Madeleine could respond, the heavy oak doors of the bedroom burst open. Luca, Vincent's most trusted enforcer, stood in the doorway, an assault rifle strapped across his chest. "Boss, we have a situation," Luca said grimly. "Richard Harrington is in the lobby. He bypassed the lower security checkpoint. He has Olivia with him, and about 10 heavily armed private contractors. He's demanding to see you." Vincent's jaw locked. The tender moment shattered, replaced instantly by the cold, calculating aura of the boss. "Take Dr. Harrison to the panic room. Keep Madeleine out of sight." "No," Madeleine said, swinging her legs over the side of the bed. "If Harrington finds out I'm here from a rumor, he'll think you're weak, hiding me. If he sees me, if he sees the heir to the Castellano family, he'll understand why the engagement is over. Harrington is a businessman first." Vincent stared at her, assessing the iron resolve in her eyes. The woman he had married wasn't just a trophy. She was a survivor. "Fine, but you stay behind me." They walked out into the sprawling, glass-walled living room, just as the private elevator pinged. The doors slid open, and Richard Harrington stormed out, his face purple with rage. Olivia trailed behind him, looking simultaneously furious and embarrassed, her designer dress still stained with dried bourbon. "Castellano!" Richard bellowed, his contractors fanning out across the foyer. "You make a mockery of my daughter in public. You break a $50 million alliance for a—" Richard's voice died in his throat. He stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes landing on Madeleine. Madeleine stood tall beside Vincent, her chin raised, the diamond ring catching the ambient light of the chandelier. Her pregnancy was undeniable. "What is the meaning of this?" Richard stammered, looking at Vincent. "You told the commission she was dead." "I was misinformed," Vincent said, his voice dropping to a glacial, lethal register. "My wife was targeted by a traitor within my own family. She survived, and as you can see, she is carrying my son. The wedding to Olivia is off, Richard." Olivia let out a sharp, indignant gasp. "You can't do this. The real estate contracts are already signed." "I will buy you out at 20% over market value," Vincent countered smoothly, "a parting gift for the inconvenience. But if you or your men take one more step into my home with those weapons drawn, the only real estate you'll need is a plot in the cemetery." The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Richard weighed his options. A war with a fully focused Vincent Castellano was a losing battle, especially when Vincent had his heir secured. 25%, Richard negotiated, his voice tight, "and we walk away." "Done," Vincent agreed. But as Richard signaled his men to lower their weapons, the sudden, deafening sound of shattering glass erupted from the floor-to-ceiling windows. It wasn't a sniper. It was an explosive charge. The deafening roar of the explosive charge tore through the tense silence of the penthouse, vibrating deep within Madeleine's bones before the shockwave actually hit them. The floor-to-ceiling reinforced glass, designed to withstand hurricane-force winds, imploded inward like a tidal wave of jagged diamonds. The concussive force picked Madeleine up off her feet, the breath violently expelled from her lungs. She didn't even have time to scream. Before gravity could drag her down onto the razor-sharp debris, Vincent was there. He moved with a terrifying, predatory speed, wrapping his massive arms tightly around her and twisting his body mid-air so that his broad back took the brunt of the impact. They hit the imported hardwood floor together, sliding several feet as a hail of glass, shattered masonry, and pulverized drywall rained down upon them. The ringing in Madeline's ears was absolute, a high-pitched whine that temporarily drowned out the world. But as her senses violently snapped back to reality, the ringing was quickly replaced by the chaotic, terrifying symphony of a war zone. "Get down! Keep your heads down!" Luca's voice roared, cutting through the thick grey smoke of C4 that now choked the luxurious living room. Through the massive gaping hole where the windows used to overlook the glittering Chicago skyline, thick black zip lines dropped from the roof of the high-rise. Men clad in heavy black tactical gear, their faces obscured by ballistic masks, swung into the penthouse with terrifying military precision. As the first man landed, Madeline caught a glimpse of a silver patch gleaming on his shoulder. A coiled serpent. Matteo's loyalists. Matteo hadn't waited for the commission to legitimize his coup. He had used the distraction of the Harrington confrontation to orchestrate a full-scale siege, intending to wipe out Vincent, Madeline, and the Harrington family in one swift, brutal stroke. If everyone died in the crossfire, Matteo could claim the throne of the Chicago outfit uncontested, blaming the massacre on a rival syndicate. The penthouse instantly transformed into an abattoir. Richard Harrington's private contractors, caught entirely off guard and trapped in the crossfire, immediately began shooting back at the intruders. The noise was apocalyptic. The sharp, rapid cracks of assault rifles, the panicked shrieking of Olivia Harrington as her father dragged her behind a massive, overturned marble dining table, and the brutal thud of bodies hitting the floor. "Luca, cover the corridor! We need to get to the panic room!" Vincent shouted over the deafening exchange of gunfire. He didn't wait for a response. Vincent hauled himself to his feet, pulling Madeline up with him. He practically carried her, his arm locked like an iron band around her waist. "My stomach! Vincent, my stomach!" Madeline gasped, stumbling as a blinding, white-hot pain tore across her abdomen. It wasn't a Braxton Hicks contraction. This was real, brought on by the massive physical trauma of the explosion and the sheer terror flooding her veins. "I've got you, Maddie. I've got you. Just keep moving," Vincent commanded, his voice a steady, grounding anchor amidst the chaos. They scrambled down the long, art-lined hallway, the air thick with plaster dust and the bitter tang of cordite. Bullets chewed through the drywall just inches behind them, shattering a priceless Renaissance painting and sending splinters of antique wood flying into the air. Luca walked backwards ahead of them, his assault rifle barking in short, controlled bursts as he laid down suppressing fire to keep Matteo's tactical team pinned in the living room. "Dr. Harrison, move!" Luca barked. The elderly physician, who had been frozen in terror near the hallway bathroom, scrambled forward on his hands and knees. They reached the end of the hall. The entrance to the panic room was concealed behind a false wall paneling. Vincent slammed his palm against the biometric scanner, hidden within the molding. The wall hissed, sliding back to reveal a heavy, vault-like steel door. He pushed it open and shoved Dr. Harrison inside. "Get in, Maddie," Vincent said, his hands gripping her shoulders, his dark eyes wide and frantic. "No!" Madeline cried, gripping the lapels of his ruined, blood-spattered shirt. She could feel the steady, rapid hammering of his heart against her knuckles. The thought of the heavy steel door closing between them, leaving him out there in the slaughterhouse, was more agonizing than the contractions ripping through her body. "Vincent, please, come inside. The reinforced steel will hold them off until your loyalists arrive. Don't leave me." Vincent cupped her face, his thumbs swiping away the mixture of dust and tears coating her cheeks. For a fraction of a second, he let her see the raw, unadulterated terror in his soul. Not for himself, but for her. "Matteo won't stop at the door, Maddie. He brought explosives. He'll breach it eventually if I don't stop him," Vincent said, his voice dropping to a fierce, desperate whisper. "I have to end this. Right now, I have to cut the head off the snake." Another deafening spray of bullets shredded the archway just 10 feet away from them. Luca returned fire, shouting, "Boss, we are running out of time!" Vincent pressed a hard, desperate kiss to Madeline's forehead. "I will come back for you. I swear on my life, I will come back to you and our son." Before she could protest again, Vincent gently but firmly pushed her backward over the threshold. He pulled the heavy steel door shut. The locking mechanism engaged with a profound, terrifying thud, sealing the vault and plunging the sounds of the gunfight outside into a muffled, distant echo. Inside the dimly lit, subterranean-feeling bunker, the reality of her situation crashed down on Madeline. The room was stocked with emergency supplies, monitors, and a small medical cot, but it felt like a tomb. She collapsed onto the cot, clutching her swollen stomach as another wave of agonizing pain washed over her, completely eclipsing the previous one. It felt like her body was tearing itself apart. "Oh, dear God," Dr. Harrison whispered, his hands trembling violently as he rushed to her side. He dropped to his knees, his medical instincts overriding his terror. Madeline let out a ragged, breathless scream, her nails digging fiercely into the thin mattress. She felt a sudden, warm rush of fluid soak through the sweatpants she was wearing. Dr. Harrison's face went pale in the harsh fluorescent light of the panic room. "Mrs. Castellano, your water just broke. The baby is coming. He's coming right now." Madeline squeezed her eyes shut, a sob tearing from her throat. Vincent, she thought, praying to a god she hadn't spoken to in years. Please bring him back. Outside the steel door, Vincent Castellano was no longer a husband, and he was no longer a businessman. The suppression of his true nature, the polished veneer he had maintained to broker deals and keep the commission happy, evaporated. He was the boss of the Chicago outfit, a man who had climbed to the top of the criminal underworld over a mountain of bodies, and his family was under threat. Vincent stooped down and picked up a heavy 12-gauge tactical shotgun dropped by one of Harrington's fallen contractors. He checked the chamber, his face a mask of absolute, chilling calm. The rage he had suppressed for 8 months, the agony of mourning a wife he thought was dead, the betrayal of his own blood, finally had a target. He moved methodically out of the hallway, a phantom slipping through the thick smoke. The living room was a graveyard of shattered luxury. The Harrington contractors were dead or dying, and only a handful of Matteo's men remained, sweeping the room with their lasers, looking for the survivors. Vincent didn't yell. He didn't announce his presence. He simply raised the shotgun and fired. The blast caught the nearest tactical operative in the chest, lifting the man off his feet and throwing him backward through the shattered window. The remaining 3 men spun around, firing wildly into the smoke. Vincent was already moving, sliding behind the ruined marble dining table. He racked the shotgun, a terrifying, metallic clack that cut through the ringing silence, and stepped out from the other side. 2 more shots. 2 more bodies hit the floor. "Hold your fire! Hold!" a voice screamed from the entryway. Vincent paused, the barrel of his shotgun smoking. Standing in the foyer, surrounded by the last 2 of his bodyguards, was Matteo. He was dressed in a pristine tactical vest over a designer suit, but his face was pale, slick with nervous sweat. He had expected to walk into a room full of corpses and claim his crown. He hadn't expected the apex predator to still be hunting. "It's over, Vincent!" Matteo yelled into the smoky, blood-soaked room, using his bodyguards as human shields. "My men have secured the lobby. Your capos are swearing loyalty to me as we speak. The outfit is mine." "You always were delusional, cousin," Vincent's voice echoed from the shadows, chilling and utterly devoid of mercy. Vincent stepped out from behind a shattered pillar. Matteo's bodyguards immediately raised their weapons, but a sudden burst of automatic fire from the side hallway cut them down before they could pull their triggers. Luca stepped out of the dust, his rifle smoking, his eyes locked on the traitor. Matteo gasped, stumbling backward, suddenly realizing he was completely alone. He raised his own pistol, his hand shaking violently, pointing it at Vincent's chest. We are blood, Vincent, Matteo screamed, desperation cracking his voice. The Commission will never allow you to execute family without a tribunal. You'll start a war. Vincent didn't stop walking. He closed the distance between them with slow, deliberate steps, his boots crunching on the broken glass. He didn't raise his shotgun. He simply stared into his cousin's panicked eyes. You spilled her blood first, Vincent said coldly. I did what had to be done, Matteo pleaded, backing up until his spine hit the heavy mahogany doors of the penthouse entrance. She was making you weak. You were turning into a legitimate businessman, Vincent. You were forgetting who we are. I took the money, yes, but I did it to save the family. You made me mourn a woman who was carrying my child, Vincent continued, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. He was now just 2 feet away from the barrel of Matteo's trembling gun. You hunted my wife. You drove her into the streets like an animal. You betrayed the outfit. You betrayed me. The money, I can give it back, Matteo choked out, tears of genuine terror finally spilling over his cheeks. Vincent, please! I don't care about the money, Vincent interrupted. With a movement so fast it was a blur, Vincent swatted the pistol out of Matteo's hand. The gun clattered harmlessly across the marble floor. Vincent grabbed Matteo by the throat, slamming him brutally against the heavy wooden door. Matteo gagged, his hand scrabbling uselessly at Vincent's iron grip. I only care about my wife, Vincent breathed, his face inches from Matteo's. Vincent drew the heavy, suppressed 1911 pistol from his shoulder holster. He pressed the cold steel barrel directly against the center of Matteo's chest, right over his racing heart. Matteo let out a final, pathetic whimper. The muted thwip of the suppressed gunshot was quiet, almost anticlimactic, compared to the deafening war that had just raged through the penthouse. Matteo's eyes went wide, the light instantly vanishing from them. Vincent released his grip, and the body of his traitorous cousin crumpled to the floor, leaving a thick smear of crimson down the mahogany wood. Vincent stood over the body for a long, silent moment, the chest heaving, the adrenaline slowly beginning to ebb. The war was over. The throne was secure. Boss, Luca said quietly from behind him, lowering his rifle. The lobby is clear. Our men are coming up the elevators now. Harrington and his daughter escaped down the fire stairwell during the firefight. Let them go, Vincent commanded, not taking his eyes off Matteo's body. He holstered his pistol and turned around, his focus snapping entirely back to the only thing that mattered. Secure the perimeter. Vincent sprinted back down the ruined hallway, his boots slipping on the bloody floorboards. He reached the false wall, his blood-smeared hand violently hitting the biometric scanner. The heavy steel door of the panic room hissed open. Vincent froze in the doorway. The metallic scent of the bunker had been replaced by the sharp, metallic tang of blood and sweat. Dr. Harrison was kneeling beside the cot, his hands covered in medical gloves, wrapping a tiny, squalling bundle in a sterile foil emergency blanket. Madeline lay exhausted on the cot, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, her chest heaving. She looked pale, completely drained. But as she turned her head and saw Vincent standing in the doorway, a weak, radiant smile broke across her face. The ruthless boss of the Chicago outfit dropped to his knees beside the cot. His hands shook as he reached out, gently brushing a damp strand of hair from Madeline's face. You came back, she whispered, her voice barely a rasp. I promised, Vincent choked out, the emotion finally breaking through his iron facade. Dr. Harrison gently placed the crying bundle into Madeline's arms. Vincent leaned over, his massive frame trembling as he looked down into the red, furious face of his newborn son. The heir to the Castellano Empire, in the ruins of a multi-million-dollar penthouse, surrounded by the bodies of his enemies and the ashes of a betrayal, Vincent Castellano finally found peace. He pressed a kiss to his wife's lips, and then to the forehead of his son, sealing a new vow in blood and gold. They were untouchable. 5 years later. The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Armory Gala cast a brilliant, fractured light across the ballroom, illuminating the absolute elite of Chicago's high society. Politicians, judges, and old money tycoons mingled freely, their laughter ringing over the soft strains of a string quartet. But the true power in the room didn't lie with the men wearing mayoral pins or the women draped in inherited pearls. It rested solely at the VIP table situated perfectly on the raised dais. Madeline Castellano took a slow sip of her sparkling water, her dark eyes scanning the crowd. She wore a stunning, backless gown of midnight blue silk that clung to her curves, a far cry from the stained, shapeless waitressing uniform she had worn on that fateful night 5 years ago. Around her neck rested a breathtaking diamond collar, a gift from Vincent for their 5th wedding anniversary, or rather, the 5th anniversary of their second life together. "They're all staring at you again," a low, gravelly voice murmured right beside her ear. Madeline smiled, leaning back into the solid warmth of her husband. Vincent sat beside her, radiating that same terrifying, magnetic authority that commanded the room without him ever having to raise his voice. He wore a perfectly tailored tuxedo, his dark hair slicked back, his jawline as sharp and unforgiving as ever. "Let them stare," Madeline replied smoothly, resting her hand over his on the linen tablecloth. "They're just trying to figure out how a ghost managed to come back to life and steal the throne." Vincent turned his hand, interlacing his fingers tightly with hers. "You didn't steal it, Maddie. You earned it." The road to this night had not been paved with roses. After the bloody siege at the penthouse and Matteo's execution, the Chicago outfit had been thrown into temporary chaos. Vincent had spent the first 2 years of their son Nicholas's life ruthlessly purging the syndicate of any remaining traitors. He had restructured his entire empire, shifting their primary investments from illicit ports into legitimate real estate and international shipping. It was a brutal, exhausting transition, but Vincent had made a vow in that bullet-riddled penthouse, and he was a man who kept his promises to his wife. "Boss," a voice interrupted their quiet moment. Luca, looking entirely uncomfortable in a tuxedo, but just as lethal as always, stepped up to the table. He leaned down, speaking quietly so only Vincent and Madeline could hear. "Richard Harrington just walked in. He's heading this way." Madeline's posture stiffened infinitesimally. Richard Harrington had kept a wide berth for the last half-decade. After the disastrous end to Vincent's engagement to Olivia, the Harringtons had retreated to their Hamptons estate to lick their wounds. "Let him come," Vincent said, his eyes darkening into twin pools of obsidian. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't need to. His mere presence was enough of a threat. A moment later, Richard approached the table. He looked older, the stress of competing with the newly legitimized Castellano empire clearly wearing on him. He stopped a respectful few feet away and offered a stiff nod. "Vincent." "Madeline," Richard said, his voice tight. "Congratulations on the Charity Foundation's success this quarter." "Thank you, Richard," Madeline said, her voice dripping with aristocratic grace. She didn't offer a smile. She didn't need to play the polite hostess anymore. She was the queen of the outfit, and she knew her power. "How is Olivia?" Richard swallowed hard, clearly uncomfortable with the reminder of his daughter's public humiliation. "She is well. She recently married a banker in London. We have moved on." "Good," Vincent said softly. "I prefer peace, Richard. But I require respect. Enjoy your evening." It was a dismissal, cold and absolute. Richard nodded tightly and practically fled back into the crowd. Madeline let out a soft breath, the tension leaving her shoulders. "You enjoyed that entirely too much." "I enjoy watching my enemies realize they can never touch what is mine," Vincent corrected, lifting her hand and pressing a slow, deliberate kiss to her knuckles. Before Madeline could respond, a small, sudden weight crashed into her legs beneath the table. "Mama!" Madeline laughed, dropping her formal facade instantly as she reached down and hoisted a 4-year-old boy into her lap. Nicholas was the spitting image of his father. Dark, unruly hair, piercing eyes, and an expression that was entirely too serious for a toddler. He was dressed in a miniature tuxedo, his bow tie slightly askew. "Nicky, what are you doing under the table?" Madeline scolded gently, straightening his collar. "Hiding from Uncle Luca," Nicholas declared, pointing a tiny, accusatory finger at the massive enforcer standing guard nearby. "He said it was bedtime." Luca actually cracked a smile, holding up his hands in surrender. "The nanny was looking for him, boss. I was just trying to assist." Vincent leaned over, his massive hand gently cupping the back of his son's head. The ruthless mob boss melted away entirely, replaced by a father whose devotion bordered on worship. "Uncle Luca is right, little man. It's late. But tomorrow I'll take you down to the docks to see the new ships. How does that sound?" Nicholas's eyes lit up. "With the big cranes?" "The biggest," Vincent promised. As the nanny approached to escort a now willing Nicholas back to the estate, Madeline watched her husband. She remembered the sheer terror she had felt that night at the restaurant, standing in the cold alley, absolutely convinced that this man would destroy her and her unborn child. Instead, he had destroyed his own world to build a safer one for them. "You're quiet," Vincent noted, turning his attention back to her as the music swelled in the background. "Just thinking," Madeline murmured, leaning her head against his shoulder. The scent of cedarwood enveloped her, bringing with it a deep, unshakable sense of security. "About the night you found me, about the waitress who was so terrified of the dark." Vincent wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her flush against his side. His lips brushed against her temple. "That waitress is gone, Maddie. You're the one who controls the dark now." Madeline looked out over the glittering ballroom, knowing that the men in this room feared her husband, but they respected her. She had survived the viper's nest. She had protected her child, and she had reclaimed the only man she would ever love. "Yes," Madeline whispered, closing her eyes as Vincent held her tight. "I suppose I do." The explosive saga of Vincent and Madeline Castellano proves that some bonds can survive betrayal, bullets, and the darkest secrets of the Chicago underworld. What did you think of Vincent's ruthless revenge against his own family to protect his wife and unborn son? If you were on the edge of your seat during this intense, real-life mafia romance drama, you know what to do. Hit that like button to show your support and share this video with your fellow drama lovers. The twists and turns don't stop here. We have entirely new, heart-pounding stories of betrayal, power, and dangerous love dropping every single week. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss a single episode. Drop a comment below telling us your favorite moment from this story, and we will see you in the next thrilling video.